Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining our diagnostic training session today. And what you're about to see is a pre-recorded training session we did over in the United States. But be assured that a lot of the material that we cover is really applicable to any automotive application. So just be aware that yes, it is a lot of North American vehicles, but they will apply a lot of the same principles apply over in the UK as well. Now, if you do have any questions, if you're watching this during the premiere, you can just leave it in the chat. We'll be monitoring live chat. If you're watching this after the premiere, then just feel free to leave a comment underneath the video and we'll get to those as we can as well. So my name is Jason Gabrenas. I'm one of Snap-on's diagnostic technical trainers. I've been in the training department since 2013, traveling around North America, helping techs and shop owners get the most out of their diagnostic equipment. Before I did that, it was a couple years as a diagnostic sales rep at Snap-on, so I had 30 different franchisees I worked with, as well as the shops that they serviced, in order to help everyone get the most out of their diagnostic needs. Then before I did that, it was 8 years at Subaru. So I worked in a dealership, and over time, I guess, just became the default diag guy in the shop. So I always ended up having the drivability problems, the intermittent problems, the weird wiring problems that would show up on those cars. And that's really where I cut my diagnostic teeth, was trying to figure out all those weird head scratcher type cars that would come into my bed. Then before that, bunch of other miscellaneous wrenching jobs. Been a little over 25 years under hood experience for me. Our topic today is maintenance functions. So it's not just changing oil anymore. We can't just change oil without needing a scan tool. I'll ask this question all the time in my classes. Is there anything that you can do on a car that doesn't need intervention from a scan tool? Now, some cars maybe, but there are cars out there, after you do an oil change, you got to reset the reminder. You got to do TPMS stuff when you rotate the tires. You got to retract the calipers when you do brakes. So we're going to talk about all those different things that you might not necessarily be aware of. So some cars you might just think, oh, it's just simple, change the oil and we're done. And then the car comes back with a problem. Or maybe with the TPMS, you don't put the tires in the right place according to the TPMS system. And then maybe it says the right rear tire is low and really it's the left front. So there's a lot of maintenance functions that are out there that you might not be aware of. So we're just going to talk through some of them tonight. So things like I said, we need a scan to perform even simple maintenance functions nowadays. I need to do an oil reminder reset. I need to put the parking brake into service mode in order to change the pads. Battery reset after I replace a battery. I don't want to overcharge it with my adaptable alternator. So I need to reset the system to tell it that I have a brand new battery in there. TPMS, when I do a tire rotation, I need to make sure the tires on the car are in the right spot. And then things like DPF regens, right? So we have a diesel particulate filter on vehicles, and sometimes it needs to be cleaned out. And there are some ways that you can actually force that with the scan tool, or the vehicle might do it itself. But oftentimes, that could be a maintenance function on a vehicle that you need to do. So we'll start first with oil changes. And oil changes are not the same way they used to be anymore either. Look at the difference here. You're really not changing oil on your grandpa's pickup anymore without having accurate information. These two trucks here look identical. There's only one model year difference. They both have a 5.3 liter engine. Well, you see the 2013 5.3 liter takes 5W30 and it's got takes 6 quarts of oil. The next model year takes 0W20 and it has 8.5 quarts that it takes. But that's just according to some specifications. If you actually read the specification from GM, they changed it to 8 quarts. They actually have a reference number here on one of their service bulletins that said, oh, there's too much. That's 8.5 is too much. So we brought it down to 8 quarts. Now, if we have a Snap-on scan tool with the fluid capacities and the oil specs in there, we can do this all from one spot. So I can look up the fluid capacity. That's where it ends up by default, right? So if I have my 5.3 liter engine, it's 6 quarts, 5W30, and that's on our 2013 Chevy Silverado. If I needed to look up the 2014 Silverado, you'll see that it's 8 quarts. And it says the engine oil capacity has been updated from 8.5 quarts down to 8 quarts in reference to this GM document right here. And it's a PIP So that's a informational document that you would get at a dealership. If there is a reset procedure that needs to be done, we can pop in there as well. We'll see that in a second. But just even having up to date information on your scan tool, you need to have that just to do a basic oil change on a vehicle. And then if we need to reset, if we flip over to the reset procedure here on this 14, you'll see that in some cases we can do this in the vehicle, right? I would say probably in many cases now, you can do it within the vehicle. The driver could do it themselves, or you would do it after an oil change, of course. But there are other things that we can do with the scan tool in order to do that. So in this case, the reset procedure says go to remaining oil left in the driver information center, press and hold the thumb wheel on the driver information center while the oil left display is active, confirm yes, and it will change to 100%. So that I can do that without a scan tool. But there also is a way to do it with the scan tool. And you might wonder, why do I need to do that in the scan tool? Well, if you can go into functional reset here, it's going to bring me to a service interval reset. And it says automatically it's going to do the same thing the driver information center does, that manual push the button, but I can also scroll it down or up in 2% increments if a value other than 100% oil life is desired. Now, why might I want to do that? So I can scroll that down, bring it down to 75%, 50%. Let's just say, and this actually thought came from a franchisee a couple weeks ago when I was talking about this, and they said, well, let's say we got an 8,000 mile oil change interval on a car, which is not out of the question nowadays, and you want to do maybe a 4,000 mile oil change instead of an 8,000 mile. So you would set it to 50%, and that way the light would go on at that mileage, right? So it's based on mileage. So if I tell it's 100% and the manufacturer has it programmed in there, and you'll see there's a few ways on certain vehicles we can actually change that distance too. But if we go in there and we wanted to make it take half as long or 3/4 as long or whatever it is, I can just adjust the oil life accordingly. And then that would get me to that oil change interval I was looking for. So that's just one example of some stuff we can do. We'll look a little bit more in a little bit as to some other things we can do manually. So that's oil, right? And then we have tire functions, right? So this has been since 08 or so, 06, 08, something like that, mid 2000, where TPMS was really standard, and we have a whole other class on TPMS. But just really quick, there's different ways to reset the system. In this case, this says set tire pressure of all the wheels specified to the tire loading information label. Set the parking brake. Oh, by the way, it's on an 18 Acadia. Place the vehicle on, run start, press the tire pressure info display. Info displays in the driver information center can be turned on and off through the settings menu. Use the control on the right side of the steering wheel to control the tire pressure. Press and hold the select button. And then start of the driver's side front tire. Place the tire sensor activation tool against the tire sidewall near the valve stem, and then it'll go around. So in that case, you don't have to use a scan tool, but it does have a function in the scan tool to do the same thing, where it puts it into a learn mode. Here's an example on an 18 BMW. So under my vehicle, using iDrive, you can do it right inside the vehicle as well, or you could use a scan tool. You could also access the functional reset from here. And then we have on the 2018 Ram. Now on this 2018 Ram, we don't have a reset procedure, a manual reset procedure to do for the TPMS in this. So in this case, we would go up to a functional reset, which will bring us inside the scan tool. Of course, in this case, it is behind security link because it's an 18. But then it has the case of program the different tire sensor IDs. So at the left front, left rear, right rear, and then of course the spare tire as well. Some manufacturers have a TPMS sensor in the spare tire. Some don't. Some don't even have a spare tire. If you think about when the new Camaro came out back 2010, it didn't have a spare tire, had a can of Fix-A-Flat in the trunk, and that was your spare. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But some manufacturers have full-size spares with tire sensors on there, as we can see right there. So we can go in there and program it. And it's pick the left front. In this case, it's going to program the left front tire sensor into the ECU. So it's going to give me whatever my sensor ID is already programmed in there. Now, how do I get those sensor IDs? couple different ways we could do that. If it's already programmed into the vehicle, there's probably a data PID for that. More than likely, we could just grab the data PID, take a screenshot, something like that. And then if I know I took my left front and I put it on the right rear, you could do it that way. That's assuming that the whoever was there before you and rotated the tires did that correctly. There's also with most TPMS tools, I know for sure with the Snap-on ones, if you just hit the tire with the with the sensor reader, it'll read the ID number off it, battery level, all that. So if we have that, we could do it that way too. But in this case, we need to write the sensor IDs into the vehicle. So we would just hit continue. Make sure you have the 8-character sensor ID available. It can be on the sensor label as well, but I don't have to break down the tire to find that. So enter the sensor ID. We hit edit. We type it in. I just put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 because we're just using an example. It's going to confirm all the IDs. Hit continue, and then it'll program it in. Easy enough. Just typing in a number. Other vehicles, I know for sure, like Nissan. Nissan has some interesting ways to do this, but they want you to use it with a scan tool, and then there's going to be 2 options. It's going to be doing it with the tool, with a special tool, or without a special tool. So in this case, you would have to do different drive it for 25 miles an hour with the tires at a certain pressure. So left front tire needs to be at 36. Right front tire needs to be at 33, right rear tire needs to be at 30, and so on and so forth. When the computer sees that given pressure, whatever it is, it knows, oh, okay, so I see 36 PSI on this tire, that must be the front left, and then it registers it. Otherwise, we can do it within the scan tool, which I think would be more accurate and take less time to drive it. So we can do a TPMS registration with the tool, the J45295 tool, or without the tool. Now, what's this J24595 tool? Well, we can use any of our TPMS tools. So there's a lot of different ones on the market. The 2 Snap-on ones we have is a TPMS 4 and the TPMS 5. And you'll see they both have little antennas on the top. And that antenna is the actuator tool that it's going to use to turn on the sensor, right? So it sends a signal, the sensor wakes up, and then it reads the information off it. It also transmits to the vehicle. So this is used to register tire pressure IDs without the use, if we wanted to do without, but with it, we just go around the tires, left front, right rear, left rear, and it'll register it simply. Otherwise, we set it to whatever the specified tire pressures are, and then we would drive the vehicle. So it's going to key on engine on, select continue. You do need to have this hooked up in order to put it into this learn mode as well. You're going to drive the vehicle. So that's TPMS, quick and dirty there. How about battery? Now, we just talked about batteries a couple weeks ago, if you saw that one. But some manufacturers use a battery management system. So that's to manage the charge rate and everything. Battery management systems use sensors, controllers, and software to monitor the battery's state of charge. This allows the vehicle to charge the battery depending on load and the state of health of the battery. But when the battery is replaced, the system needs to be reset, usually by using a scan tool with it. So in this case, we have a 16 Audi S5. So we have a couple different functions here. We have battery parameterization for when the battery is replaced, and then a coding and configuration function as well. Pop in there. And then we can read whatever the current code is. We can go to the configuration list and we can program a new code. So if we wanted to program a new code, please write down the current code. It enables you to re-enter it if you need to. You hit continue. And then it brings me in here. That's a pretty long code, and I'd probably be worried that I wrote it down wrong. So I might just take a screenshot of that, and then I'll have it later to do that. So I can go in and edit it, and then I can type it in there. The parameterization on this vehicle. So that'll be after we replace the battery, we got to tell it what kind of battery we put into it. So specify capacity in amp hours, battery's first 3 of the serial number, last 10 of the serial number. Plug those in there, hit program, and you're ready to go. So that's even just replacing a battery. So we talked oil. We talked some oil change. That's probably the most common thing, right? Tire rotation, probably your second most common thing. And then we talk about batteries, which are also very common. How about brakes? Brakes are one of the top 5 things that usually get done as maintenance on a vehicle. And there's a lot of vehicles out there now that have electronic parking brakes that you need to use, release in order to change it. Otherwise, you can cause damage. There are ways to do it that I hear people talk about. It's like, oh yeah, I can just push it and it's fine. But you don't know if you're damaging the motor because there's a little electric motor, a little actuator on there that you may be damaging by doing that and pushing it in or screwing it in or whatever it happens to be. So we don't want to damage it. We want to do it the right way. So we want to be able to go in and actually do the scan tool function for it. So this one's on a 15 Kia. And in this case, I'm going to just pop in the service resets and relearns because that's a really easy way to just get in and find the reset I need instead of trying to look through all the different modules to find which one it is. Because is it in analog brakes? Sometimes on some cars it is. Other times it could be in the electronic parking brake module. So instead of having to know where to go, I can just go into service resets, and then it'll give me a list based on job type. So it's not just a function, but it's a job. So replace the disc brake pads. So if I want to replace the disc brake pads, you'll see all the maintenance stuff's at the top. Replace the disc brake pads. I can click on that, and then it'll give me a little bit of data up here, any TSBs that are pertinent, and then I can come down to functional resets here, and it'll open that up. It gives us both actuator controls, and then it also gives us pad change mode. So we see before change and after change. So the pad change mode before change kind of sounds fairly simple, right? So before changing the brake pad, this function should be performed. This will allow you to push the piston into the caliper by retracting the spindle nut with the actuator. Execute before pad change mode, then change the pads, then execute pad change mode after pad change. While pad change mode is in progress, DTC 2750 is raised and test messages is displayed at the cluster. So it'll know that it is in maintenance mode essentially. So we'll continue. And then it's going to make sure engine off, ignition on, make sure everything's operating correctly with no codes, and release the parking brake. Make sure the parking brake isn't on, and then hit continue again, and it'll actuate it. Then once it's changed, we'll do the work, change the pads, lube them up, whatever, put them back in. And then after it's all together, we'll go into after change. And then we'll come in here and engage the electronic parking brake after the pads are replaced. Do not use this function while the brake pads are being replaced. So somebody jumps into the car while I'm trying to replace the brake pads. That's bad. Please be sure to take general safety precautions before activating this function. You could get pinched too if it's so. That's why I said just change the pads, assemble it, then do it. Engine off, ignition on. Make sure everything works correctly. Step on the brake and then press OK. So in this case, it says keep stepping on the brake until the motor stops and the whole process is finished. That allows to kind of calibrate for the distance that it needs to travel as well. So make sure you step on the brake, and then once you're done, you're done. Some vehicles it's a little bit different. Example, I worked at Subaru for a while there, and the electronic parking brake came in. The old system, the early system of the electronic parking brake, it was the drum inside the rotor, so we didn't really need to mess around with them too much unless we had a problem. You didn't need it to change pads because it's inside, unless you were changing those the shoes inside on the drum brake, then you didn't need to worry about it because it has pads and drum. On the newer systems, I think it was like 14 and up is when they changed it. Then it was just a caliper with an actuator, so you have to put it into maintenance mode in order to change those pads. So just do your little bit of research and see what is necessary as I'm doing these maintenance functions as well. This is just more of an awareness thing. I know you've probably done this before, but for those of you who haven't, or you don't think about every single car that comes in, oh yeah, doing an oil change, I got to reset something. Just keep that in mind that it might be something you need to reset. We're going to talk about some oddball ones, at least in my mind, it's a little odd. When we go live on the tool, I got a couple more examples too. And now let's talk about diesel. So diesels, I don't know, last 20 years or so, they've started putting on more emissions items. Soot after treatment and such. So things like an oxidation catalyst, a DPF, which what we're going to talk about here. Exhaust temp sensors, DPF back pressure sensors to make sure it's working correctly. Hydrocarbon dosing valve to make sure that we're making sure that we're taking some of the other stuff out of the air. So diesel particulate filter is kind of like a catalytic converter in a way. It kind of looks like it anyways. But what it does is it has a couple main jobs. It's going to catch it. It's going to store it. It's going to store all the particulates through the filter. And then it also, once it gets full, we need to burn that off, which if you think about it logically, I don't know why they do it that way. I'm going to store all this soot that I'm taking out of the exhaust, and then I'm going to burn it to make more soot all in one place, all at the same time, instead of spreading it around. I don't know. I'm just a guy, but it seems a little weird to me. Maybe somebody can tell me why it makes sense, but it doesn't really make sense to me. And I think some of the diesel guys I've talked to say, yeah, it doesn't make sense. But anyways, it is a substrate in here. You see we have every other square is blocked off, and then every other one is open. The ones that go in that are open go through into the blocked off area, kind of like a filter, and it filters out the soot. The soot then accumulates within that substrate there. But the problem is, once we do this enough times, it gets plugged up, and then we have to clear it out. Now, if it gets this bad, I'm pretty sure it needs to be replaced or record. There are places that do that too. But ideally, it'd be a regen, right? So there's 3 different types of regens that we can do. Some need a scan tool, some don't. So we have a passive regen, which is when the DPF temps are high enough to burn the soot off without needing any extra fuel or anything like that. Only happens under high loads. We have an active regen, which can be initiated by the PCM or by a scan tool while I'm driving down the road. Extra fuel is added to the exhaust, which raises the temperatures to over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which then burns it all up. Or we have a parked regen or a stationary regen. It can be initiated by a dashboard switch, or it can be initiated by a scan tool, used when attempts at active regens fail. So we can do that. And then if none of those work, probably plugged up and probably need to be replaced. All right, let's look at a couple more examples on the tool here. So this first one, I never really thought about it. Never really thought about it when I was researching for this one. I just didn't even think about the possibility that manufacturers had done this. It makes sense now, I guess. But this is a 2016 Ford Focus. You wouldn't even think that, it's like 7 years old, right? But a 16 Ford Focus. If I want to do the wipers, I want to do anything with the windshield wipers. So let's look up wipers in Shopkeep. Okay, so windshield wipers replacement. Yeah. So if I wanted to look at, say, well, this is going to be the wipers, not the motor. So I need to look at that. But the pivot arm is there. There is, I think there's a way. Yeah, this one doesn't say. But what they do is they have they have individual wiper motors now. Instead of having the linkage that they used to have, they have individual wiper motors, and they're like stepper motors, and they'll work independently of each other. When you go to wiper. And when I do things to the wipers, like maybe the wiper arms or something like that, I would need to remove and replace it. Now, it looks exactly like the wiper motor we'd all be used to on a vehicle, except there's 2. There's one on the left and there's one on the right. So there's no linkage anymore, and it's just here it is. Here's my wiper motors, right? So what's the scan tool have anything to do with this? Well, if we come back to the scan tool, and we load this up. This Ford Focus, and that is in the body control module, right? So, yeah. So if I go into functions, we'll see that there's a wiper motor module calibration. Procedure places the wiper motor module in calibration mode. Perform this procedure if the wiper arms have been removed and reinstalled. So anytime I remove and reinstall the wiper arms, hey, I replaced the windshield on them. I'm a glass company. I need to do this. If I have to do anything else where I have to take the cowl off, or engine work, sometimes you need to take the cowl off. Anytime the arms have been removed and installed, not necessarily the wipers themselves, we'll see that in a minute, but the wiper arms have been removed and reinstalled, we have to do that. Make sure the wipers have been installed correctly according to manufacturer specs. Battery sufficient charge. Low battery voltage may prevent this from doing it. And the windshield needs to be clean and dry. So you continue, ignition on, and then it's in calibration mode. So press the wiper washer switch down 3 times within 5 seconds. Wipers will swipe upwards to a pre-initialization position and stop. Gently pull both wipers out towards the A-pillar molding until the distance between the wiper arm where the wiper blade is mounted and the edge of the windshield is 50 millimeters. So you have to manually move this. Press the wiper washer switch down 1 time. This sets the current windshield wiper arm position as the approved position, and the wiper arms move back to their park position. So after I've done this, it's to calibrate it to make sure they don't swipe too far or not far enough. If the wiper arms are pulled closer to the A-pillar than the specified distance during the setup, do not attempt to move the wiper arms back towards the pre-initialization position manually. If this is attempted, the wiper motor could be damaged. Pre-initialization can be reset by first selecting intermittent on the wiper washer switch and then selecting off. So some manual movement needs to be done on this. And then when it's done, and it goes back to normal mode. Kind of crazy, right? Carry out a high-speed wiper test on wet windscreen. Also want to note in here, we're not going to go into the different resets, but there are multiple resets. Battery monitor system in there, resets the battery system, TPMS training mode with or without scanners. So I can do my TPMS in there as well. And that's all in the body control module. That's another thing we have to think of. This just popped in my head. So TPMS, is it in the body control module like it is on this vehicle? Does it have a separate TPMS module? Is it in the wireless control module like it is on some Chrysler vehicles? You need to know where to look. So that's another thing that service resets really helps out with as well, because you don't necessarily need to know where to look. You just need to know, what am I doing? What am I working on? Oops. What am I working on in order to do a reset? All right, how about this BMW? So on a Beamer, it's a 2019 3 Series of some sort. And on these, there's maintenance as well. Now, some of the stuff you can do with the little joystick or what have you. But there is other stuff in here in the instrument panel. Pretty sure it's this one. It is not this one. Where did it? Oh, it's in the engine. Never mind. The other one's in the instrument panel. So the engine. Go into the engine and look at some resets that we need. So things like, how about if I need to do a timing chain? So there's a Vanos timing chain test in here. It actually goes in and it evaluates whether or not there's stretch or not in the timing chain. I thought that was kind of interesting. Battery replacement as well. If I need to reset my battery after the fact, that's in there. Difference for the solenoid valves as well. Cooling system ventilation. So if I do cooling system service on this vehicle and I need to burp the air out, we would do a cooling system ventilation, and it goes through and it runs the electric pump and just burps everything out. So if you go into ventilation, continue service, cooling system venting, perform the following steps in a specified order to start the bleeding procedure. It takes about 12 minutes. Therefore, make sure the charger is connected, and then switch on the ignition, switch on the low beams, prevent the vehicle from going to sleep. Temperature selector is the maximum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If I needed to bleed the cooling system, we would need to do that. So it takes about 12 minutes, like I said, and the pump speed is going to change. I'm just going to hit cancel or actually continue to terminate, switch off. No, there we go. So that's just another thing I need to do. If I change the coolant on the vehicle, I need to do that. It's crazy stuff. One more here, this Jetta. This one is in the instrument cluster. So on Volkswagens, some Volkswagens, they have this difference. There's a couple different ways to reset the maintenance on there. Go down the cluster. Okay. And if I go into this cluster, there is a service reset function in here. And what that'll do is it allows us to reset the oil change interval just to default, reset maintenance intervals, and view existing service. Now, on some of them too, we can change the mileages. So if I need to change the maximum mileage to the next service, I can do that. I can change the maximum days, mileage cents, mileage to the next time base, et cetera, et cetera. So as you can see, there's a lot of different things that we need to do, that we could do if we needed to. change oil quality, etc. So all of that is available. It used to be only through expert mode we had this, and now we actually have it within the the vehicle specific system within the cluster to be able to change that, because the system to reset it is part of the cluster. So bunch of different ways to go about that. Bunch of different ways to go about that. And then the last one I'll talk about here is we can do something similar in BMW as well. I know I talked about one BMW, but there's also a BMW Expert Mode in here, which is a little bit different than the Expert Mode in Volkswagen. Gives you a few warnings there. I'm just going to pick a, let's see, I think this guy right here. And then this one's in the instrument panel. So if I go into the instrument panel and I just pick one, and then you'll see we have a couple distance displays, but we have condition-based service. In the condition-based service, we can change all sorts of different things. So we want to change our spark plug intervals when we change our spark plugs, front brake pads, rear brake pads, diesel DPF if it has a diesel in that case, engine oil, micro filters. We can change all the different things, whether we want to display it or not, or whether it's enabled or not, to call for service, and how long it has to go before it does call for it. So there's a lot of different things that you can do in here. They have to go into expert mode in order to do that, right? So a lot of different functions and options. Just make sure you're reading up the manufacturer's maintenance items when they say, okay, when you change the oil, you got to do this. Change the battery, you got to do this. Change an alternator, you might have to do something. So any of your maintenance functions, belts, right? Belts, sometimes you have to do. There's a functional test we talked about when we talked about the mild hybrids. There's a functional test for that where it has to reset the belt tension in order to work. So there's a lot of different things that you need to reset on modern vehicles. Just make sure you're doing that so we don't have any of those come back. And with that, that is our time here today. So make sure you tune in for new diagnostic content every week. We will be premiering a new video every Wednesday at 7 p.m. UK time. So make sure you check it out on the YouTube channel. If you're watching, well, of course, you would be watching this on YouTube, but make sure you subscribe, thumbs up, ring the little notification bell so you know anytime we post new content. And it's youtube.com/SnapOnDiagnosticsUK. With that, time for questions. If you have any questions, just feel free. Once again, if you're watching this on a premiere, just leave it in the live chat and we'll answer those. Otherwise, leave a comment under the video and we will get to those as we monitor those comments as well. So I'd like to thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to learning a little bit more about how you might be able to be more efficient at diagnosing vehicles using some of the information that we've given you today. Hopefully we'll see you next week. Hopefully you can watch and see you on any of our other videos. Have a good week, have a good night, and take care.